after 22 years of nightmare and terror, saved only by a desperate conviction of the mythical source of certain impressions, I am unwilling to vouch for the truth of that which I think I found in Western Australia on the night of July 17th through 18th, 1935. There is reason to hope that my experience was wholly or partly an hallucination, for which indeed abundant causes existed. And yet, its realism was so hideous that I sometimes find hope impossible. If the thing did happen, then man must be prepared to accept notions of the cosmos and of his own place in the seething vortex of time, whose merest mention is paralyzing. He must too be placed on guard against a specific lurking peril, which, though it will never engulf the whole race, may impose monstrous and unguessable horrors upon certain venturesome members of it. It is for this latter reason that I urge with all the force of my being a final abandonment of all the attempts at unearthing those fragments of unknown primordial masonry which my expedition set out to investigate. That is from The Shadow Out of Time, one of H.P. Lovecraft's strangest stories. Yes, welcome once again to Mythos Monday, where I am here at the Rustic Von Lodge in about the darkest, creepiest corner I could find, so we can talk about this, one of H.P. Lovecraft's most ambitious mythos stories, The Shadow Out of Time. It's kind of a strange masterpiece of science fiction. This is definitely one of H.P. Lovecraft's most pure science fiction stories. It is a pure science fiction story. The horror element in this is pretty subdued. Horror, of course, is always part of whatever H.P. Lovecraft does, but the horror element is softened, I think, by the science fiction epic element of this story. Now, in this story, it's about a professor of political economy, Nathaniel Wingate Peaslee, and he's doing a lecture one day at Miskatonic University. Of course, he's a professor at Miskatonic University, and he's doing a lecture. Then all of a sudden, he just blanks out, and he develops amnesia. His mind goes blank, and then later on, his personality seems changed. He has amnesia. He doesn't remember who he is or where he is, and he seems to have a very strange, alien personality. And when he recovers from his collapse while he's giving his lecture, his family, they don't really recognize him as the man that he was. He seems a stranger. And he undergoes expeditions to different places. He's trying to gain a bunch of knowledge. And your first thought is, well, he's trying to gain the knowledge that he lost from his amnesia, but no. He's trying to gain all kinds of strange, queer bits of knowledge. And for years this goes on, before he finally collapses again, has another mental collapse, and his old personality seems to return. And when his personality returns 5 years later, he has no memory of the preceding 5 years when he was acting so strangely and seemed to have a completely different personality. And during that time, his wife leaves him. His kids don't want to talk to him because he just seemed so weird. Like the man that they knew had disappeared and was replaced by something else. And so when his old personality resurfaces and he can't remember, what he's been doing for the past 5 years, he has to kind of find out. He has to try to figure out what's been going on with him for the past several years. And the only member of his family that'll still talk to him is his son. He has a son that'll stick by him. His son has become a professor of psychology over at Miskatonic. And also around this time, our man Peasley starts having some strange dreams of another life in another place as an alien being, conical-shaped, large monster alien being, and it's in a city of aliens. And they seem to all be living in what seems to be pre-ancient times, like millions of years ago. And you can tell this from some of the flora and fauna that are around, that he's living in a time millions of years ago. And so he has dreams of being this strange creature and living in this strange society. And they're very realistic, and he's describing the buildings. He could remember the buildings, and so he starts putting out some articles about his experience and some of the things that he sees in his dreams. It turns out in his researches, when he's trying to research what's happened to him and what is happening to him with these strange dreams, he finds out that throughout time, other people have had similar experiences, and they have the same kind of dreams of living as some sort of strange monster in a prehistoric world. And he describes some of the buildings they lived in, and that these buildings were constructed by these huge stone blocks, huge, gigantic stone masonry. And he describes that, and because they're kind of specific. And eventually, because he put these articles out with his son, which talks about these dreams that he has, it just so happens that a fella in Australia has stumbled upon some masonry just like what he's describing from his dreams. And so he says, you know what? Let's put together an expedition, and we'll try to uncover this masonry, see what's going on. So Nathaniel Peasley is kind of wants to do this, but he's kind of frightened about what he'll find. So they go on this expedition, and along with the expedition is William Dyer, who didn't get enough trouble in At the Mountains of Madness, so he's decided to join this expedition as well. So while they're at this expedition, they find these big hunks of stone masonry that are just like the buildings that Peasley saw when he had these dreams of being an alien in this ancient city. So this thing really existed, this building at least. So did these creatures exist? What was he doing being an alien creature in prehistoric times? So it's all very strange. And we find out through the course of this story that millions of years ago on Earth, there lived a race of alien beings called the Great Race of Yith. And what this great race can do is they can project their minds into the future and take over the bodies of other creatures. And through doing that, they can record the history of everything that not only has happened, but will happen in the future. And what happens to the poor suckers whose minds are taken over, their minds and personalities are rocketed back in time and have to inhabit these huge monster bodies. And that's why Peasley had these dreams. He had a dream that he was inhabiting this big monster body. Now, this is spoiling a lot of stuff for the story, I know. But there's really no way to talk. This is a complicated story if you haven't figured that out by now. And it's hard not to talk about this story without spoiling it just a little bit. So, yeah. So it seems like this expedition has stumbled upon a city, or the remains of a city that had existed millions of years ago, that was the city of the great race of Yith, these guys who projected their minds into the future, and the people whose minds were taken over, they were sent back. And then when they were done with these bodies, they'd swap them out again, but they would wipe out the memories so they wouldn't remember, all the stuff that had happened, but Sometimes trace memories lingered and you have these dreams. So Nathaniel Wingate Peaslee, he's trying to deny the whole time that this thing happened. But at one point in the story, he's out amongst the ruins and he finds a tunnel that leads down in the ground. And he ends up in a building that he remembers being in when he was one of these alien creatures. I guess that's about as much as the story I'm going to tell you, because there is more in the story towards the ending of the story. And I guess I've only kind of sketched it out. But this is a pretty cool story. It's really ambitious. I mean, this is a novelette, but there's a lot in this novelette. It's it's not a short story, but considering its length, man, he packs a lot in there. Now, of course, there's something even more horrible lurking within this story than the great race of Yith. There's something that frightens even them. Another horror which could engulf all of humankind. You know, Lovecraft has a lot of that stuff going on. So yeah, this is an interesting story. Now the thing about this story is, this is a pure science fiction story. Now because of that, like I said, there's not much horror in it. You can see H.P. Lovecraft making the attempt of making a lot of this scary, but it all ends up being more interesting than scary. And even with the horrible thing that is lurking, that even the great race of Yith was afraid of, that's never really sketched out enough to make it really scary. So that was a weak point. So the fear, the horror is a weak point in this story, the shadow out of time, but the science fiction is great. So it's a really interesting Cthulhu mythos. It is the least frightening Cthulhu mythos story, but still tremendously interesting, really ambitious. It's kind of an achievement in a way, and it really makes you wish H.P. Lovecraft could have continued further with his Cthulhu mythos, that he could have lived a little longer just to see what else this guy would have come up with. Because this was a really interesting story. It felt a lot like At the Mountains of Madness. It had that kind of style to it, but a little bit different. So it was kind of cool. Now the next mythos, the next Monday's mythos, is the last mythos story. The Haunter of the Dark, I believe it is. Let me see, it's in here somewhere. I believe it's The Haunter of the Dark, where Lovecraft takes a step back and goes back to horror again from science fiction. And that is pretty much the end. H.P. Lovecraft didn't live to make any more mythos. So only one Mythos Mondays left before we go back in time and start checking out some of his earlier work. So yes, I hope you enjoyed your Mythos Monday today here at the Rustic Vaughan Lodge. Sorry it was so creepy. So I'll catch you next time.